At last, the day had arrived, the day I had been waiting for. It was time to leave behind the constant reminder of your face and the freeloaders who had taken without giving anything in return. They should be grateful for the years of generosity they had received. With determination, I said, I won't be coming back. Thank you for everything up until now. I quickly packed my essentials and bid farewell to the house that had been my home at my in-laws for so long. As I stepped out the door, I noticed a subtle look of satisfaction on my mother-in-law's face. Pleased by my departure, little did she know, I carried with me a painful secret. My name is Megan, I'm 35 years old and work remotely from home. I've been married to Charles for 6 years. Our marriage was already struggling when, in its 5th year, Charles's once healthy father became seriously ill, requiring our immediate and constant care. Reluctantly, I agreed to move in with my in-laws, as Charles was their only family who could care for him. Though I considered quitting my job to become his full-time caregiver, my company allowed me to continue working remotely. Given my strong performance, however, living with my in-laws was far from easy. It exposed me to the inevitable tension between a mother-in-law and daughter-in-law. Megan, get in the kitchen and do your part. How long will you keep avoiding your responsibilities? My mother-in-law would scold. I'm working right now, I'm on my computer. What are you talking about? I would snap back. Despite juggling household chores and caring for my father-in-law, I worked hard to get back to my pre-crisis salary. 4 months of intense effort paid off, and I finally matched my previous earnings. It felt like a victory, but my determination came from a harsher truth. Charles's income wasn't enough to support us. Though I hoped the strain would eventually ease, the struggle only deepened. With every passing month, it felt as if the money in my wallet was vanishing. When I examined our expenses, I discovered the problem. Charles had developed a penchant for indulgence, and my mother-in-law wasn't any better, often spending freely on her hobbies and social events. Charles, eager to impress, used our credit cards not just for work lunches but also for lavish parties with friends. Meanwhile, I was left to shoulder the household responsibilities and the care of my father-in-law. My income barely covered our expenses, and the idea of saving money seemed impossible. Worried about our finances, I decided to bring it up. Charles, Mom, it seems we've been overspending. If this continues, we might burn through our savings. Can we cut back a bit? Their response was not what I expected. Charles snapped, I can't look cheap in front of my colleagues, don't you get that? I understand wanting to maintain good relationships at work, but you don't need to pay for their outings every time. I tried to reason, and what about those girls' nights? That's got nothing to do with work. But they dismissed me, leaving me feeling both frustrated and anxious about our financial future. The burden of trying to manage our needs while they remained financially irresponsible was becoming overwhelming. I confronted Charles again. It feels like you care more about having fun than about me. You come home drunk, and all you talk about is your outings. It's like those moments are more important than being with me. I couldn't keep my frustration inside anymore. My mother-in-law, however, just laughed it off and sided with Charles. I'm glad you understand, Mom, Charles said confidently. As for my mother-in-law, she defended her spending. If I didn't go to my classes, I'd be stuck at home. I take these classes with my friends to make the most of my time. Their dismissive attitudes and harsh words echoed in my mind, labeling me as a terrible daughter-in-law, accusing me of not contributing because I wasn't bringing in an income. It was maddening because, in reality, I was the one working from home, managing the household, and caring for my father-in-law. Worse yet, my mother-in-law had spun a tale for Charles that painted her as the sole caregiver for my father-in-law, leaving me portrayed as a lazy homemaker. This distorted view of my role was hurtful and left me speechless. Despite all the times I thought about leaving, it was my deep love and concern for my father-in-law that kept me from walking away. From the moment I married Charles, he had always treated me with kindness, in stark contrast to the way Charles and my mother-in-law treated me. His sincere appreciation, often calling me a wonderful daughter-in-law, meant the world to me. He never failed to thank me for my care, always apologizing for the burden. These small acts of gratitude strengthened my resolve to continue. I couldn't abandon him to the care of Charles and my mother-in-law. My father-in-law seemed to understand the situation more than anyone, recognizing my contributions, not only in caregiving but also in maintaining our household's financial stability. His words of thanks gave me strength, reminding me that I was doing the right thing, even in the face of constant adversity. Though I feared what might happen to the household without me, My greatest concern remained the well-being of my beloved father-in-law. I made the decision to stay and care for him with unwavering devotion until he passed away a year later. His funeral became an emotional battleground for me, a place where my grief collided with the cold disapproval of those around me. My tears, genuine and raw, were met with sharp judgment, amplifying the ache of my loss. The reaction of those close to me, especially my mother-in-law, only underscored the emotional complexity of the situation, yet it also reaffirmed the importance of the role I played in his final days. "Why are you crying so much, Megan?" my mother-in-law asked, her tone biting. "The father-in-law has passed away. Isn't it natural to mourn this way?" Her words, harsh and accusatory, stung, but the truth was, my mother-in-law had been largely absent during my father-in-law's decline. Her focus on hobbies and frequent social outings had left the majority of the caregiving to me. Instead of acknowledging the sacrifice I made, she had painted herself as the sorrowful, self-sacrificing mother-in-law, while casting me as the callous and cruel daughter-in-law. She spread this narrative to our relatives, who, unaware of the full truth, began to believe it. As my grief was dismissed, I began to distance myself from these relatives, a move that did not go unnoticed by Charles. He confronted me, his tone accusing. "You embarrassed Mom in front of everyone." His words were a shock. "What are you talking about?" I asked. "I was just crying over the loss of my father-in-law." "Well, your mom was uncomfortable with how much you cried," Charles responded. "I never said she didn't take care of him at all. I was simply mourning someone I cared about." As the argument escalated, Charles accused me of insulting his mother. He suggested that if I couldn't understand why they felt hurt, maybe I needed to reconsider my actions. "All I did was grieve," I said, feeling the sting of his words. I wasn't attacking anyone. The tension between Charles and me reached its peak after my father-in-law's death, and soon relatives had to intervene to calm things down. Following the funeral, I chose to remain silent, withdrawing from any further conflict as the family proceeded with the formalities. Then, a lawyer arrived to go over the will and the distribution of the estate. He began, "I'd like to go over the contents of the will regarding your late father's estate. To his wife and daughter-in-law Megan, he has left half of his cash assets. To his son Charles, he has left the family land and home." Immediately, my mother-in-law interjected, her voice tight with disbelief. "If Charles gets the land and the house, why is Megan getting anything? She's not even related by blood." The lawyer responded calmly, "Your husband was deeply grateful for the care Megan provided. He wanted to include her in his will as a token of his appreciation. This decision is final and cannot be altered." My mother-in-law's face twisted with indignation. "I can't believe this. You were taking care of him just to get an inheritance, weren't you?" I defended myself, the accusation stinging. "I've always had a good relationship with my father-in-law. I took care of him because I loved him and respected him for the kindness he always showed me." Despite my words, my mother-in-law continued to insist that my care was a calculated effort for financial gain. But eventually, even she grew weary of her protests, and the lawyer resumed, stating once more, "This was your father's decision." As the will's details sank in, I felt a quiet sense of vindication. My father-in-law's gratitude was now a matter of public record, legally affirmed despite the doubts of others. Yet, unexpectedly, my mother-in-law's expression shifted. Her earlier bitterness softened into something resembling a smile. "Yes, that's fine, I understand," she said with an almost forced nod. Charles, still perplexed, turned to her. "What do you mean? Why the sudden change of heart?" With an air of satisfaction, my mother-in-law explained, "Now that Dad's gone, we don't need to rely on Megan anymore. Her inheritance is just like severance pay. We don't need her in this house anymore." It was clear that she had grossly misunderstood my father-in-law's intentions. To her, the will was an opportunity to rid herself of me, not a recognition of my love and care. What she didn't know, however, was that my father-in-law had made this decision precisely to free me from the oppressive weight of living under their roof. Before he passed, he had shared with me his wish for me to move on and live independently, free from the tension and hardship of the household. The inheritance wasn't just his way of expressing gratitude, it was his plan to help me escape, framed in a way that would seem natural to Charles and my mother-in-law. I feigned surprise, my voice quivering as I turned to Charles. "Father-in-law, why would you do this to me?" I said, playing the role of the wounded caretaker. With tears in my eyes, I looked to him, pleading, "You understand, don't you? Why don't you just divorce her?" After a long moment, Charles stood frozen, his emotions torn between confusion and the weight of the truth. Swayed, perhaps, by his mother's influence, Charles suddenly declared, "You know what? Let's get a divorce." This dramatic shift played right into the plan my father-in-law and I had quietly orchestrated, a plan that would ultimately grant me the independence I so desperately needed, and free me from the suffocating constraints of my in-laws' home. After the will was read, Charles inherited the family home and land, while his mother received a portion of the cash. With these assets in hand, Charles, in a casual tone, said, "There's no need to worry about living arrangements anymore, so it's fine if Megan leaves." I raised an eyebrow. "What do you mean by that?" I asked, already knowing full well what he intended. His response was detached. "I hate to ask, but could you just leave and agree to the divorce?" Recognizing there was no place left for me in their plans, I nodded. "Understood. I guess there's no place for me here anymore." With a calmness I barely felt, I opened a drawer, retrieved the divorce papers I had prepared after our last major argument, and handed them to him. Charles signed them quickly, the relief on his face unmistakable. "Finally, I don't have to deal with you anymore. You should be grateful we put up with you for this long," he said, his words stinging but not surprising. I forced a smile, masking the turmoil inside. "Is that so? Okay, I understand. I'll leave. Thank you for everything up to now." As I stepped out of the house, my mother-in-law's face lit up with glee, completely unaware of the repercussions her actions might have. Without hesitation, I went straight to City Hall and filed the divorce papers. Later, I arrived at the apartment I had secured in advance. Stepping into the spacious, empty room, the silence was blissful, and I whispered to myself, "Finally, I can be by myself. This is great." For the first time in years, I felt a sense of freedom wash over me. Freed from a marriage that had become increasingly suffocating, I was now able to embrace my independence, build a life on my terms, and rediscover my peace. My father-in-law's clever plan had set me on this path, allowing me to escape the toxic environment and start anew. Living on my own was a revelation. The solitude allowed me to focus on my remote work, and with no distractions, my productivity soared. Not only did my income increase, but I also relished the sense of control over my life. This was the fresh start I had longed for. But just as I was settling into my new life, an unexpected call from my ex-husband, Charles, disrupted my tranquility. It had been months since we'd last spoken, and I was taken aback by his sudden call. "Why are you calling me, Charles? Wasn't it you who wanted me to disappear?" I asked, my voice flat with disbelief. "Megan, please help us. We're in a tight spot," Charles pleaded, desperation in his voice. I couldn't help but chuckle at the irony. What kind of joke is this? My salary hasn't changed, yet suddenly you're running out of money. How is that possible? A bitter laugh escaped me. "That's because you no longer have my income to fall back on. You spent your salary on yourselves, living irresponsibly. Maybe now you and your mother will learn the consequences of financial recklessness." Charles, confused, asked, "What do you mean?" I didn't mince words. "While you were out enjoying luxuries, I was covering all of our living expenses with my salary of about $6,500 a month. Now, I'm making even more, and I'm doing it all on my own, without anyone holding me back." Frustrated and perhaps beginning to understand the gravity of the situation, Charles pleaded, "Megan, can't we start over? It was a mistake to let you go. I want to make things right." I scoffed at his sudden change of heart. "It's clear you're just after my income. Don't be ridiculous. I never want to see your face again. What happened to the inheritance your mother received? She should be living comfortably off that." Charles sighed heavily. "It's almost gone. We spent it all on shopping sprees, trips abroad, and I lost half of it in the casino." I didn't let his admission sway me. A foolish mother raises a foolish son. "I have nothing more to say to you. I'm a stranger to you now, and I can't, and won't, do anything for you." Desperate, Charles begged, "Don't be so heartless. Please help us. This has nothing to do with me. There's nothing more to discuss. I'm hanging up now," I said coldly, ending the call. In that moment, I cancelled the mobile contract we had shared, severing the last remaining tie between us. A year later, as I passed my former mother-in-law's house, I noticed it had been replaced by an empty lot. It seemed the house had been sold off, likely due to financial struggles. I felt nothing but indifference, continuing on with my life, free from the past. In the months that followed, I took up a wine class I had long been interested in. There, I met a man 3 years my senior, someone who took our relationship seriously. After a year and a half of dating, we married. He's an executive at a well-known company, humble despite his success, and with a warm, wonderful character. We respect each other's careers and share a fulfilling, balanced life. Looking back, I can't help but feel that all the hardships, all the struggles, were somehow part of a greater plan, one that led me to a life filled with genuine happiness, respect, and love, and in a way, it feels like a gift from my late father-in-law, a final act of retribution that allowed me to find true happiness and a relationship built on mutual care and respect.